Jughead is an amazing episode in terms of island mythology. In this installment I will first cover the episode and the character's journey on the island. Then I will cover the history of the US Army's time on the island and the background of the 1950s Others, which will use a lot of information we get from this episode, from the real world as well as theories. The night has turned into morning. Miles, Charlotte, Daniel and 2 survivors meet at the creek. The 2 survivors are blown up by landmines before the others find them.
Stay away, could you?
Sawyer, Locke and Juliet have 2 of the others hostage, one of them being Charles Widmore. I like the discussion they have.
And how is it that they know how to speak Latin, Juliet?
The same reason I do. Because they're others.
A teenage Charles Widmore would shortly after this learn that these people he met were time travelers. And despite the group name Others is something that Danielle first said, this name is now tossed out by Juliet in the 50s. So Widmore would know that this would be a nickname for their group by outsiders, decades before the name is conjured up by Danielle. So the nickname in one way is the semi-official name for the others for the longest time. Ellie and the group starts trekking through the jungle. At some point they walk over a fresh grave. 4 US soldiers dead under a month, as Miles said.
Did any of them happen to mention what year it is?
We're here.
Before they end up at the famous golf course Valley, where the US Army set up camp before the others took over their clothes and tents. Locke, Sawyer, Juliet and their captives start walking, and then the guy masquerading as Cunningham agrees to take them to their camp. His directions match up well.
Okay, we need to head east. Another couple kilometers till we hit the ridge.
Finally, the island is not switched with their cardinal directions as we saw in the last season. This is pretty much correct with where they are, a couple of kilometers east and the ridge. Widmore kills the guy and runs away. I love the hesitation here, as well as them missing the shot. After all, the island wouldn't let them kill Widmore. If Widmore had died, it would be a paradox. Rose, Bernard and Vincent are the only ones left after the massive murder at the beach. However, I believe that they walked in this direction, going past the Swan side and through this banyan grove where Sawyer and Kate played I Never. And Jin, well, he is still floating in the ocean someplace. Ellie takes out Faraday and Richard talks to him.
I was forced to kill him. All of them. Forced? By whom? You answer to someone, don't you? You follow a chain of command, right? Yeah, well, so do I.
I'm not sure about what Richard says here. Did Jacob order him to kill all the US Army personnel? Isn't that weird, since some of them were candidates? Maybe Richard met with Jacob, but misinterpreted what he said. On the lighthouse wheel, Cunningham, Jones and Mattingly are present, and the others are using their uniforms. Granted, Widmore does call Cunningham by that name.
What the hell happened?
Cunningham and I. A group of them surprised us.
But he's in front of Faraday at this point. Therefore the real Cunningham and the real Mattingly are probably dead and were candidates. Unless Richard doesn't mean that he got this order from Jacob, but from someone else at this camp that is the current leader of the group. I'll come back to the leader of the others later. Locke gives them all a 10-minute head start, so Juliet and Sawyer will go down the hill and follow Ellie and Faraday. Locke arrives at their camp and learns the real identity of Jones. He is Charles Widmore.
There's a crack in the casing. It needs to be filled with lead. You need to take it off this platform carefully and bury it.
You brought me all the way out here to tell us that we have to bury it? Told Albert you could disarm that thing.
You don't need to worry. You do what I say, you bury it. It won't go off.
Locke gives Richard back his compass before Locke vanishes right in front of his eyes. In the perspective of the others, they would know that these characters are special. Ellie would be haunted by the image of these men who disappeared in front of their eyes. Richard would be equally amazed. They will all come together to talk and disassemble the Jughead Tower, since it's not there in the future, and create this construct with wheels. Then they will all travel up north through the jungle and through the valleys to one large Egyptian chamber, and then store the bomb there. The episode concludes with a 5th time shift. The group are now in 2004, shortly after Michael, Hurley and Jin have played some golf. Charlotte falls down and the episode ends. Now let's look at the island history. We've got a big gap in events from 1867 to September 1954. That's 87 years. A whole lifetime of events. Considering so much happened in 4 months for our lost characters, imagine an entire lifetime of events. Let's add in a bullet point here in 1937, which is when Eloise and Charles were born. But we don't know if they were born on the island. So we need to consider the potential of a lot of island history. In 1867, there's only 3 people on the island that we know of, after every other civilization has died. Richard Alpert would therefore learn a lot about the island from Jacob, including how to be an intermediary of the people that are brought to the island, but also the specifics on how to leave the island. One thing that the YouTube channel Getting Lost discussed is that Richard Alpert was tasked in leaving the island with a Black Rock ledger to return it to the Hanso family. I can subscribe to that idea. The ledger was sold at the auction many years later. There is an error though with the dates, which has frustrated the Lost fans.
The Black Rock set sail from Portsmouth, England, March 22nd, 1845 on a trading mission to the Kingdom of Siam, when she was tragically lost at sea. The only known artifact of this journey is the journal of the ship's first mate, which was discovered among the artifacts of pirates on Ile Saint-Marie, Madagascar, 7 years later. The contents of this journal have never been made public nor unknown to anyone outside the family of the seller, Tovard Henso.
But the Black Rock crashed in 1867. Since turning the wheel gets unpredictable results, such as Ben arriving 10 months later, or Locke arriving a couple of years later, Richard might have landed in Africa in 1852, back in time. Maybe he turned the wheel from this side anti-clockwise instead of the other. It doesn't matter to him since he doesn't age, and he gives the ledger to the family. One problem is that if he's back in time, he would surely try to get to the Canary Islands if he thought he had the ability to change things, save Isabella from dying. It wouldn't work. Whatever happened, happened. Another plausible theory is that Richard turned the wheel, landed in the Tunisian desert a couple of months after his arrival, and gave the ledger to the family, but just made up the date. Ricardo, as he's originally called, is technically a slave who vanished in the Pacific Ocean. He probably gave himself a fake identity and told the Hanso family that he was part of an expedition in 1852. He probably figured out that there was an expedition in that region in 1852, or it could be as easy as the auctioneer saying the date wrong, that it wasn't discovered 7 years later, but maybe 27 years later. Anyway, the Black Rock ledger, which presumably has written down specific instructions on the travel to the island, would be of very much interest of the Hanso family and much later Charles Widmore. The coordinates of one of the windows to the island. By the time we come to the 1950s, Richard has lost his Spanish accent and have a complete North American accent. I know that from a production standpoint, everything is due to the actor Nestor Carbonell being from New York, but with Cuban parents. But if we use that as a clue, is it possible that he was influenced by settlement by North Americans on the island, or maybe even off the island if he was a lot in the US rather than being in the UK, and rather than being influenced by British settlers? If we look at the people with speaking parts in Jughead, we've got the British Charles Widmore and Ellie Hawking, but the guy posing as Cunningham has a North American accent.
That idiot shouted out, "Meet at the creek." They knew exactly where they were headed. Sent a group after them.
He didn't switch sides from the army to the others since he also spoke Latin like the rest. Maybe this North American group came to the island first, maybe on a ship, who would then be indoctrinated to the new community and later on invited to the temple. I'm not American, so I don't know how that phonology evolved after British settlers, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but if I were a betting man, Richard would rather develop his North American accent if Jacob invited a group of people from the eastern coast of the US first, possibly in the late 1800s, that came there after the Civil War, and one of them was selected a leader, and possibly another one became the temple master. Another group that could have arrived there much later, a year after Widmore and Ellie are born, would be a group of sea explorers sailing on the Sea Dragon, a voyage that got caught in a storm and was lost at sea in the Pacific. The man in charge was Richard Halliburton of the same family that started the Halliburton Company, which produced the case.
You're wasting your time, man. If you pick the lock on a Halliburton, I'll put you on my back and fly us to LA.
You better find yourself a runway, Daddy. 'Cause there ain't a lock I can't pick.
What's he trying to do? Pick the lock on a Halliburton. Good luck.
He could have arrived there too. So even though Cunningham seems to be of the same age as Widmore and Ellie, he's likely from a different North American family, considering that so many have been on the island, and like I said, we have over 80 years of time to theorize from here to here. I don't think it's a stretch to say, for instance, that Ellie and Widmore were either brought to the island as children in the late 30s or early 40s, or born on the island and befriended a small group of North American others. For all we know, the older generation might live at the temple, people that came here in big sailing ships, while the younger and tougher guys who killed the US Army stayed here, the older generation being the original seafarers. People who were, for instance, part of the US-based Sailors Union of the Pacific, founded in the late 1800s, or other groups, if North Americans came first. What about Widmore and Hawking? One theory is that the families of Jonas Whitfield and Magnus Hanso, who were both important members on the Black Rock, became close, that the Whitfield family changed their name to distance themselves from their greedy, corrupt, slave-owning father, that they changed the name from Whitfield to Widmore, and these families would come to the island with a young Charles Widmore and with a young Elvis Hawking. After becoming interested in exploring where their family members were lost at sea, which was detailed in a ledger they have back home.
This man is now the property of Captain Magnus Hanso.
Hope we don't get seasick.
Danish industrialist and munitions magnate Alvar Hanso, whose financial backing made their dream of a multi-purpose social science research facility a reality.
That's a fun theory. I can totally be behind the theory that Charles Widmore is part of the Whitfield family. I do disagree with the theory that Eloise is directly related to the Hanso family, since she is definitely not Danish. If she is, then maybe one branch of that family moved from Denmark to the UK and then joined the vessel to the island. Or maybe she is a distant relative of Stephen Hawking. Just a quick edit here. I want to mention some things about the family trees that I made, which was quite a fun thing to do. However, I want to mention that the names are all fictional, with the exception of the confirmed names. For instance, in the Hanso tree, we have Magnus Hanso, but we don't know like the rest of his family. We know that Toward Hanso is a relative. I don't know where in the picture he fits, so I just placed him here. And we also know about Alvar Hanso and that his daughter Rachel Blake, so I just made the name Blake over here, and the rest are just fictional. And if we are buying the theory that Elvis Hawking is part of the Hanso family, so maybe Mette Hanso, which is a fictional name, a Danish name, married another guy in the UK, and they became a family and went to the island and gave birth to Elvis Hawking. As for the Widmore tree, I have to mention some things. This column over here. These people are part of the Bad Twin family. You see in the novel Bad Twin, which is not really canon to the show, it's supplementary material, but we have the Widmore Corporation there, and there is an American faction to the corporation that we know from Lost. So maybe Bernard Bryce Whitfield, or Widmore, which is mentioned as the grandfather in the book, is part of this family, and maybe they had a split, and these guys, they went to the US, and the other guys went to the island. So all of these people are part of the Bad Twin novel, and not mentioned on the show at all.
Sawyer, put the book down. It's not a book, it's a manuscript. I'm about to be the first and only guy to find out who done it.
But these rich families could be more than those two. It could be a group of naval families with similar interests in shipping, sailing, trade, or maritime-related research, such as oceanographers.
I looked upon the vessel that was to take me to the island of Tahiti, a destination so far from England that one couldn't go farther without starting to come home. and the length of the journey was equalled by the importance of its mission.
There is a large quantity of sea-related communities, especially in countries with strong maritime history, like the US and the UK. Another theory I like is that Widmore and Ellie came from a family on board a British naval ship that belonged to Anderson McCutcheon in the early 1900s. Various British families with strong ties to marine life would decide to settle on the island. At some point, McCutcheon would leave the island, and 1 year before Widmore and Ellie were born, McCutcheon would be back home in Scotland to distill his famous whiskey.
This is a 60-year McCutcheon, named after Anderson McCutcheon, esteemed admiral from the Royal Navy. He retired with more medals than any man before or since. Moved to the Highlands to see out his remaining years. Admiral McCutcheon was a great man, Hume. This was his crowning achievement.
If Charles Widmore is a descendant of McCutcheon, or came from his ship, then that would also make sense for his fascination for this man. And Ellie could be the daughter of someone else that came from this ship. After all, the British Royal Navy played a historic role in several great global explorations for centuries, so it makes sense that at some point they found the island. Let's look at the leader of the community.
You answer to someone, don't you? You follow a chain of command, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so do I.
One theory is that a young Alvar Hansel came to the island and became the leader of the others. But I think it irks me a little bit, especially since that feels like something that should be brought up during the Dharma days or in the truce, since the Dharma initiative was funded by him. It's still an extremely good theory, and nothing wrong with that. It also makes sense that he was on the island at some point, and in my episode on the Blaster map, I proposed the theory that he was on the island during the Hanso group inspections that are written down on the map. One descendant of the North Americans could have been a leader and could have given commands to the young Widmore and Hawking, as well as Richard Alpert, and one I like very much is that a young Ray Shepard was the leader. I know that it feels very much as fan fiction, but so many fans, me included, found his scene in 316 to be so interesting.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, here is my Freddy Cat Rabbit.
Hey, Ray.
Hey, Jack.
When do you get out of here?
Sooner the better.
Could you please take one? Look at it.
Want to tell me why you took off this time, Ray?
Do I really need to answer that?
First of all, many thought he seemed quite young, possibly blessed by Jacob. Another one is that he is watching his magic show and the White Rabbit, which is heavily associated with both Jack and Christian Shepherd. A disappearing or reappearing rabbit is a classic trick in magic shows, and as highlighted in the Orchid video too, this could serve as a clue of the White Rabbit is someone that disappears into Wonderland and something that Ray wants to follow to get back to the island. We see him packing in the episode 316, maybe a suggestion that he wants to retire and die on the island, especially after this comment.
One of these times, I'm actually gonna get away. They won't ever find me either.
So maybe Ray Shepard is a little bit older than I thought and served as a leader of the others in this time period with a group of Americans, influencing Richard Alpert's accent, and when we come to the 1940s, he might have expressed wishes to return to the mainland to start a family. Hence why Richard says that the process of finding a new leader starts at a young age. Both Widmore and Ellie were either born or came to the island, and they were being eyed as potential candidates to replace him. By the time we've arrived at Jughead, he might have taken several trips off the island, because Christian Shepherd is a small child at this point in time, and he's now in the process of stepping down as leader of the others. Richard now with the task of selecting a new leader. And during Hurley's leadership of the island, after the series is over, he could have invited Ray Shepard there to live out his final days here. I know this all sounds like heavy-handed fanfiction, but I just find it beautiful that all three generations of Shepherds would have their final rest on the island. So during the 1950s, we have a bunch of others here. Widmore and Hawking, likely descendants of British seafarers who were either born on the island or grew up there, have traveled across the various places and come to know the place a lot. If you subscribe to the idea that Alvar Hansel was the leader of the others, then that's fine. If you subscribe to the idea that someone else was the leader, then I might propose the idea that Alvar Hansel was here on the island, but he might have helped the other side, the US Army. In The Lost Experience and Mysteries of the Universe, we learn a little bit more about this man, and that he was a munitions magnate during the Second World War. He might have gotten in contact with the US Army at some point, just like the Los Alamos project led by J. Robert Oppenheimer, hiring a lot of European scientists. Alvar Hansel could have been one of the many people who helped out the US Army set up Jughead at the island. So we come to 1954, the US Army finds the island. They could have started building stuff already. In my episode on the Blaster map, I speculate on the phrasing at the top saying scientists discover ferry port. This extremely long ferry port could have been built by the US Army for a massive ship. From there they start to scout the areas. They will find this open field over here and then go back and forward with materials such as wooden planks, tents, beds and of course the bomb. The design of the tents are the same as the US Army had during the Korean War earlier in this decade. Another cool thing is this over here. Near the bomb are the crates from the Black Rock. You can see them more clearly in the behind the scenes footage. Why bring them here? Now this is why I added the theory that Alvar Hansel was part of the US Army expedition. He might have been here for other reasons, to find the death site of his grandfather. The name Magnus Hansel had to have been uttered or passed down for generations. He must have been a well-known captain. Even Ladzinski knew about him, so we can add the potential theory that Alvar Hansel led a group here, scoured the ship for valuables, and then traveled down to the valley to meet up with the rest of the team. The army set up explosives around the island, such as down here at the creek near the caves. The clash between the army battalion and the others lasted for a short time, and it all happened a month prior to the time travelers' arrival. A lot of the conflict happened around this area.
4 US soldiers. Dead just under a month. 3 of them were shot. 1 died of radiation poisoning.
The rest likely died other places and some might have escaped. The others likely found some storage area that the army had filled with uniforms. The others would steal them and use the uniforms as their own. And another guy was fiddling around with the bomb. Not a good idea. If anyone have seen the HBO show Chernobyl, you know what happens when you're not careful. The episode suggests that there are more army men left from this dialogue.
Ellie tells me that you're not willing to reveal where the rest of your squad is?
Why would I do that? So you can kill them too.
We didn't start this, friend. Your people attacked us.
For all we know, Hansel and a few others could have escaped when the others started mass murdering them, and that would explain why the Dharma Initiative have one of the top secret photos by the US Army hanging on the wall in the lamppost station. Alvar Hansel brought home a lot of experiences as well as that photo, and in the next decades he would start funding a big project that would come back to the island and research it. That's it for Jughead. Next episode is The Little Prince, which will explore an outrigger chase. Please like, share and subscribe, since that helps a lot for such a small channel as this one. See you in a week.